by the time I was 6 years old, Eric, I was convinced that I was going to hell. And he would be screaming and hollering, and mom would be sitting on the couch taking it, and she would cry. I thought, well, hey, that's how you treat somebody you love. By the time I was 17, I was a full blown heroin addict. And Eric, that's what brought me to my knees. That meth is what brought me to my knees. It brought me to my knees. I'm sitting in this circle, and they literally moved away from me. They moved away from me. And I'm like, I can't believe this. But I left church that day, and I didn't return to church for over 10 years. That was the last time I was going to let those church people hurt me. I was hurt like I've never let people hurt me before, you know, and I was hurt and I was angry. Nothing changed, Eric. If nothing changes, nothing changes.
Have you ever had a physical cut, scrape, or wound that caused you to bleed? How did you treat that wound? Did you clean it and put a bandage on it? Well, of course you did, because not doing so can cause an infection, which can lead to some really bad things for you physically. Now, let's talk about a heart wound. You know, an emotional hurt caused by rejection, abuse, or judgment from others. How did you treat that wound? Did you treat that wound, or did you try to hide it and cover it up without dealing with it? You see, emotional wounds are a lot like physical wounds. If they're ignored, they don't just go away, they get infected. And sometimes that infection spreads. It can show up in anger, addiction, bitterness, and sometimes isolation. Before long, that hurt can turn into emotional sepsis. This hurt can begin to take over every part of my life. It skews my outlook and can even impact my spiritual well-being. How does a person treat and clean an emotional wound? Can my emotional and spiritual health be connected? And if so, is there hope for healing? These are questions that I want to ponder as our guest shares his life change story with us. My guest is zooming in today all the way from Florida. He has an incredible story, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So, hey, new friend, why don't you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hey, everybody. My name's Steve Shates. I'm here in Navarre, Florida. I'm a follower of Jesus, and I am in recovery, long-term recovery from a drug addiction. But I struggle with depression and anger.
So why don't you start us off with your beginnings, kind of where you were born and where you grew up? Tell us a little bit about where you're from.
Well, I was born in Nashville, Tennessee in 1954. So I'll kind of give you a little idea of how old I am. That's where I lived probably the first 6 years of my life. And then we moved a little north of Nashville to a town called Hendersonville, which at that time, Hendersonville was just a small bedroom community, home to a lot of country music stars who wanted to get away from the hustle and bustle of downtown Nashville.
Well, tell me what it was like growing up in your family. Did you have any siblings, or were you an only child? Tell me a little bit about your family of origin.
I always wished I had a brother, but I never got that. I have two younger sisters, 2 and 6 years younger than me. But my sisters and I, we got along for the most part, most of our lives.
Was there any faith in your family? I mean, did you go to church every Sunday, or did you never go to church? I mean, what did your family believe about God?
Well, we went to church. My dad never went. He never went to church. And of course, I didn't want to go. Well, if he's not going, why do I have to go? And the thing of it is I didn't understand what was happening in church at that time. We went to a Southern Baptist church, which I lovingly refer to as an Old Testament church. I don't remember hearing a lot about Jesus. I remember hearing a lot about the mean, ugly, nasty stuff that God would do if you sinned. And So as a result of that, by the time I was 6 years old, Eric, I was convinced that I was going to hell. And by the time I was 6 years old, and I caused enough trouble that my mom didn't make me go to church anymore. So that was my experience up to that point. And I got bullied in. There were some kids groups that I always got bullied.
So that's really interesting. So your dad didn't go to church. Now, would you say he was an atheist, like he didn't believe in God, or he just didn't want to go to church and be a part of that corporate worship?
Um, he just didn't like going, and I don't know what his belief was. I really don't. He never talked about it that I recall.
So it doesn't sound like you were that close to your dad. Did you guys spend time together when he wasn't working, or not so much?
Not so much. My dad was a traveling salesman, and so he was gone all through the week, and then he would come home, and he would maybe have a gift for a kid or something. So I learned to associate love with material possessions. That's how he demonstrated his love. Um, but when he would come home, he was a functioning alcoholic, and um, he would come home, and he was an authoritarian. He was a 30-year National Guard guy, and he would come home and he would bark orders, and it was a very dysfunctional house. He was the one that would come in and create chaos, if you would. And my mom was the one that was always there to sweep everything up and make it look real nice and on the outside. So that's kind of the home I grew up. It was very dysfunctional. And but what I recognize now in life, see, he came from a broken family. He never knew his biological father, and he always resented that. And that came just through conversations throughout the years as I became an adult. But I think he stuffed that anger, and it would come out in rage, and especially when he drank. Um, I remember, I remember him coming in from work and coming in and him and mom getting in a fight, or he would start one, and he would be screaming and hollering, and mom would be sitting on the couch taking it, and she would cry. Never saw any physical issues, just the verbal and emotional abuse. And she would cry. And in my little mind, I thought, well, hey, that's how you treat somebody you love. So I proceeded to live that curse out too. And whenever I would do that, they would leave. And I'm like, what are you doing? I'm just trying to show you how much I love you.
Wow. That's again such a testament to how our parents influence us. And so it sounds to me like there was some turmoil there as a child, and I guess that you and your sisters got to witness. Did your parents stay together, or did they ever split up, or what happened with all of that?
They eventually divorced when I was 25 years old. I had already been married and divorced by that time, and there was a lot of infidelity on his side. I found out later on in life, and so they eventually divorced. But all of us were grown except for my youngest sister, and she was just about to turn 18. So it was kind of like they waited until the kids were grown to do this.
Well, what were you like in school, and what did Steve believe about himself? Were you self confident? Were you type A outward, or were you more withdrawn? What were you like as a young child?
I told you earlier I got picked on a lot, and a lot of that was because I was very, very shy. I stuttered, and I had some Tourette's issues, and so I would do things and make noises, and then when I tried to talk, I would stutter, so I got made fun of, and And I didn't speak up because I had been I had no self esteem, no self worth, and this was all a result of the stuff that was going on at home, and the way that I was treated, and so at school I was kind of reserved early on in school in the early years, and I've I've got a picture that I look at from time to time of me with a burr haircut, and I didn't have any front teeth. And that's the little boy that was making a lot of my decisions. This scared little boy that didn't want to make a mistake and wanted to make sure everything was good when he got home.
So as you look back over your, young years, pre-high school, so as you look back at that time period in your life, what was the most difficult thing that Steve had to deal with? I mean, you mentioned several things. You mentioned your dad's anger. You mentioned, your stuttering. You mentioned, some physical issues that were going on with your body that you were embarrassed about, and so it made you quiet. I mean, what if you had to put them in order? What would you say is the biggest thing that you struggled with pre high school?
I would say through high school, I grew out of the stuttering and I grew out of the Tourette's. Um, I still stutter from time to time, but I've got pretty much control of that. But I would say the biggest thing was the self-esteem issues. That's some things that I kept under locks, and I became funny because I was depressed, and I became funny so people wouldn't see that. So I think guarding who I was the biggest struggle through high school, and that in and of itself, that struggle is what led to my years of addiction.
So it sounds to me like you were not very self confident in yourself, and that maybe a low self esteem, not believing that you were good enough, and possibly your father. It sounds to me like sometimes you said he was very authoritative, and did he ever give you a slap on the back and say good job and attaboy, or did you always feel like it was never good enough?
And that nothing I ever did was good enough. I lived my entire life trying to please my father. I played sports that I didn't want. Look, I was always a small kid, wiry, little skinny guy. I played football. Man, I would get plastered. And he never came to any of the games. Never. And I would ride to the games with the neighborhood kids. Neither one of my parents would show up. It was always what I didn't do, and it was, that's the kind of stuff that I grew up in. So, I stuffed anger down. I never learned how to um, I didn't know how to express anger in a healthy way. There was only one person allowed to be angry in our house, and it wasn't me. So I stuffed it all down for it to only, when it finally surfaced, it was rage.
So you told me that by the time you were 5, you believed you were going to hell. So, did you ever, I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, and they're very big on, talking about hell, where you're going, and that you need to repent. Did you ever make a decision for Christ, and would you consider it sincere if you did?
I never made a decision for Christ as a kid. And I'll be honest when I say that up until I had been in recovery, now this was before Celebrate Recovery, before Christ centered recovery, I had been in recovery for probably close to 7 years. I was mid 30s. I lived my life as an agnostic. I was not real sure about this whole God business. There was nothing, no evidence in my life. Of course, I wasn't doing anything to find the evidence, but there was no evidence in my life of a loving, caring God. And I think, I'm just going to be honest with you, Eric, if it wasn't for secular recovery programs that offered the opportunity to have a higher power of my understanding, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. If somebody said, you're going to come to know Jesus and you're going to love him, I would have bolted. I would have bolted right then because my experience with church people was not good.
Well, let's move into high school. Let's move into adolescence, and you are, a teenager, and of course, with being that age, some extra freedom comes usually available. We're able to start driving and going out on our own. What kind of groups of people did you get involved in high school?
Um, well, in high school, I tried to get involved with the jocks. There were the jocks, and this was in the '60s, and there were the jocks and the heads, and I'm an old head, so so I got involved with the less than desirable crowd. I tried dating. I had terrible acne. I had cystic acne when I was a kid growing up. So that reduced the self esteem even further. And I got picked on because of it. And, but I found a group of people that kind of the misfits, if you will, that were just like, hey, man, come hang with us. And what led to that was a drunken night. I got drunk one night. My parents were out. I hit the liquor cabinet, then went to a football game. Um, and a bunch of older kids kind of flocked around me and accepted me into their crowd. But what I found out was that I felt good about me. The acne didn't matter. The insecurities didn't matter anymore. I was able to just cut loose and have fun without worrying about what anybody else thought of me, And I think that was the escape I was looking for. That was what I was looking for. I was looking for acceptance because I wasn't getting it in school. I didn't study a lot in school, but I made good grades. I was a B and C student, and I didn't study. Um, I wanted to be a hippie. I mean, to be honest with you, that was where my mindset was. And it was shortly after. This was probably when I was 13, 12, 13, 14, somewhere in that vicinity. And then I found weed, and that opened up another door, and it progressed from that point forward. By the time I was 17, I was a full blown heroin addict.
Holy cow. Well, man, from 13 to 17, you became a heroin addict. So you went from alcohol to weed, and then you went from that to the hard stuff. Man.
It was a fast train straight down.
Wow. Yeah. So tell me a little bit of how that was introduced to you. I mean, now weed, I mean, back in the 60s, and I mean, that was pretty, I mean, you probably didn't have a problem in getting a hold of weed and doing that. So what led you from, alcohol and weed were kind of probably together. What led you to heroin? I mean, holy smokes, that's a pretty hard drug. Was that at a party? Did one of your friends introduce you to it? How did you get into that?
Well, like anything in addiction, it was a progression. It went, and I don't want to talk about a lot of specific drugs, but it went from the alcohol and the weed to what we called in the day to downers, acid, just experimenting with all these drugs. And I was at a party one night, and somebody asked me if I would like to try it, and of course I didn't inject it that night. I snorted it, and I liked it. So then, and I had already been experimenting with IV drug use at this point, but I was really afraid of that because the stigma associated with that was not a pretty sight, and so the first time I tried it, I snorted it, and then after that, I started injecting it. And the insanity of it is it made me deathly ill. I was throwing up, and but I continued, and I continued, and I continued, and until finally I had to have it.
So did your parents acknowledge or see that you were having issues, or were they oblivious?
I'm gonna be real honest. I don't know how they could not see, but it was never brought up. It was never talked about. Now I had a job and I worked at the same place as my mom, and she would give me a ride to work. And this was, I mean, I was out of high school by this point, and I had to work. You know, I wasn't just going to be able to lay around the house. And God bless my mom, man. I hate that she went through this, but probably 4 out of 5 mornings on the way to work, I would have to make her pull over so I could vomit because I was sick. I would wake up sick in the morning. And she got to the point, and I always had an excuse. It was always something. And I think she knew she just didn't want to say it out loud because she would be talking about her firstborn. But she got to where she would just shake her head. She'd pull over. I'd vomit. The rest of the day would go on. And then right after work, I would disappear until late that night. And the cycle would repeat itself.
And they never really brought it up or sat you down and wanted to talk to you
Never,
about it. Wow.
never. The
Wow.
no talk rule was definitely in effect in our house.
Wow.
And I dropped out of school my senior year, out of high school, got my GED shortly thereafter.
Well, when you're 17 and you're a heroin addict, and I don't even know where you're getting the money, where are you getting the money to buy the drugs? Did you have to sell the drugs? I mean, tell me a little bit about how in the world you continued your addiction.
Well, when I first started, I mean, I'll be honest, we used to go steal Coke bottles. Um, there was this grocery store. The statute of limitations is over, I'm sure, but we would go in the back of this grocery store and they would stack cases of refundable bottles. Okay. They were 3 cents a bottle. I remember that. And we would steal cases of those bottles. And sometimes we'd just bring them back in the front door and cash them in. And we would go get heroin with that money. And it didn't take much. Back then it was cheap. I say cheap compared to today's prices. And, and it wasn't every day, but it became every day.
Right. Well, that's kind of how the enemy works, right? Just try
Right.
it just a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And before you know it, it's become an addiction and is dominates your life. So why don't you, so what, right out of high school, you didn't go to college, right? So you just started into the workforce. What career were you pursuing at that time?
Well, while I was in high school, I started working in the construction field. And I worked in the construction field for 7 years or several years. Started out as an electrician's helper, and then I got into carpentry, which that was my love. And so I worked in the carpentry. I was a frame carpenter, then I became a trim carpenter, then remodeling. Um, I did that for several years, and there came a time during that man, I had to do something different. I was afraid I was going to die from this stuff, and I joined the military. And I went into the military and detoxed in basic training.
So let me ask
In
you a
basic training.
question. So was the motivation to go in the military, was that to get off of drugs because you felt like that you were an addict, that you were just like, man, this is a problem, and this was your solution, was joining the military because you thought you couldn't get it in there. Is that accurate?
Well, that stemmed from an overdose. I had an overdose, and I thought, man, I've got to do something different, you know. And I thought Nashville was the problem. Okay, I wasn't looking at me. It was my surroundings were the issue. So I thought, well, if I can get out of here, the problem will go away. So I joined the military, and and the old saying, "Everywhere you go, there you are." You know, and so this was a Vietnam era. It was right at the tail end of the Vietnam War, and um, I went in and I weighed 125 pounds when I went into the Army. I jokingly say it during my testimony that I was so skinny that if I turned sideways and stuck out my tongue, I looked like a zipper.
That's
But
hilarious. So tell me about your military experience. What was it like there? How long did you serve? And of course, now I've got a son in the military, and I know also that military life, they certainly are okay with alcohol. That happens a lot after you're not on duty. So did it solve your problem going
no,
into the
no,
military?
it didn't solve my problems. Military's full of people just like that are trying to run. And my military experience, I went in and I was, I was not very receptive to the authority because of my upbringing. There was authoritarian, and so I found the same people in the military that I hung out with in civilian life, and the party continued. And I eventually found another IV drug user, and we picked up right where I left off, and never was caught or anything like that. Was very, very careful. Um, I did what I needed to do in the military, and I got out, and my addiction picked up right where it was, with the exception at this point I was selling the drugs in order to support my habit, and that went on for several years until the guy that I was my friend that we were selling it with, he had a man. This guy was, I mean, he had. This sounds weird, but he had a genius IQ, man, and he was a student at Vanderbilt University, very, very intelligent, and we were shooting heroin every day together and selling heroin. And he had a car accident, and he died in this car accident. He nodded out behind the wheel, and they found a bunch of heroin in his car. And that wasn't the first person that was close to that had died from directly related to heroin. But um, I just quit. I just quit using after that. After he died, I just quit using. His mom was a very influential person, and she found his stash. He found his stash of money, and she was on a mission. And so I kind of like, these are some things I've never talked about before with anybody, but that scared me enough. My freedom, even though I was in a self-made prison with the drug addiction, my freedom was threatened. My physical freedom was threatened at that point, and man, I quit. I just quit. I quit. Well, actually, I changed drugs is what I did. I just changed drugs, but I quit doing the heroin at that point.
How hard was that to quit? Sounds to me like you quit cold turkey almost. So
I did it. Man, it was. You know, I see today people go in and they get these comfort drugs to come off of opioids. That wasn't my case. It was fetal position. It was vomiting. It was extreme diarrhea. Uh, it was something that made, to this day, I never want to go through that again. It wasn't pleasant. It wasn't fun, going through that. And, and that right there was a huge deterrent for me ever wanting to go back again. I didn't get all the little drugs that they give them nowadays in treatment, so they're comfortable. I didn't get comfort drugs.
So now lead me. You said you traded drugs. So I mean, what did you trade it for? What did where did you go after that?
Well, alcohol was always in the picture. Alcohol was always in the picture. There was always alcohol was easily available. The weed was always there, always there. Uh, but I started doing cocaine, different kinds of pills. There was always some drug available to use, and I started using cocaine IV. This was before crack, so I often say I got clean BC before crack.
Before crack.
But so that was kind of and to crystal meth, and Eric, that's what brought me to my knees. That meth is what brought me to my knees. It brought me to my knees.
So we're in the middle of your, addiction and drug usage and all this stuff that's going on. Where is God in all of that? Are
I have
you?
no idea.
You have no idea. You were not even, that was not even in the picture with you at all. You weren't even thinking spiritual stuff at all. Is that correct?
I mean, now looking back now, I'm not confused about that now. Looking back, I see God all over it. But at the time, I didn't. And I remember making this statement. I came home one night and I had hit something. And my roommate woke me up and he said, "Man, what did you hit in your car last night?" And this was my response. "Was there any blood on it, on the car?" And he said, "No." And I said, "I don't know what it was." And I remember saying it, "God got me home last night. God got me home last night." I later found out what I hit, and um, I was coming home drunk. I just don't remember hitting it. Made it to the house. Wasn't anybody involved. It was just me. But the foxhole prayers was a big thing. "God, you just get me home tonight. I promise I won't do this anymore." And I didn't until the next day.
Yeah.
So that was the extent of my relationship with God. And every year at Christmas, I would go with some friends that were Catholic to midnight mass. Wiped slap out every time. And
Why?
get on
Why go
and
to
get
why go to mass? I mean,
I have no idea. I'm not Catholic.
wow.
I did that for probably 5 or 6 years in a row. And
Huh.
I don't, I still to this day, I don't know what motivated me to go, but I
Huh.
would go. It was a beautiful church downtown Nashville. And I remember I got ran out once because I was drunk and obnoxious.
Yeah. Okay, so and I know that there always comes a turning point in our lives, and usually we are our own worst enemy, and we end up getting to a low or a bottom. And so, what led you to that? Give me the events at least. So you're 25, 26, 27. You're somewhere in that neighborhood. You're upper 20s, and so where did your addiction lead you?
Um, Man, I was living in a trailer park that I had to fight the roaches for the food. And I wasn't raised like that. I mean, our house, when I was growing up, always had food. It was clean and all that stuff. And I was, um, for to term to describe it that the listeners would understand, it was like living in a crack house. And it was dirty, it was nasty, it was something back at the time I probably paid, I think it was $160 a month rent for this place. So that can give you an idea of what you get. And it was terrible. I mean, it was terrible. I talk about this, and it's like I'm talking about somebody else, like it's not even me. And I look back on that, and now I can see that even in the deepest, darkest times of my life, God was holding me up because it wasn't me. It was the footprints in the sand when there was only one set. My feet weren't touching the ground. There was a guy that lived up there that um, he was like, let's go to Florida. And he had a concrete mixer. He was a concrete guy, and I was so we were going to start our lives over again. We were both at a bottom. We went to Florida to start our lives over, to Daytona Beach, all things, and it was just going to party at a different location. Through a turn of events there, we turned around and came back. And man, on the way back, I was praying, and I was praying, and I knew I wasn't going to live much longer if I kept in this direction. I knew it. I knew it. I had seen too many of my friends die, and and the guy I was with had gone to treatment a year before. He was gone for 30 days. He came back. He looked good. He smelled good. His family liked him again, but he started hanging out with all of us. He didn't, nothing changed, Eric. If nothing changes, nothing changes. And eventually he was doing back to the same old, same old. So I thought, well, part of it was that I wanted to change, but part of it was I was going to play a game on my family for acceptance. God had other plans. I came back. I was going to go to get a, go to treatment. I came back. I was jobless, homeless, and penniless. And my aunt let me come to her house with the stipulation that I find a place to go to treatment. I knew nothing about it. I didn't know it cost money. I thought it was free. I just didn't know. I got laughed at on several calls that I made, but I finally found a treatment center that accepted indigents. I didn't see myself as an indigent, but I was an indigent. And that was humbling. I went to this treatment facility that accepted indigents. And amongst about 21 other drug addicts, my life changed. My life changed. I found, look, I didn't have nothing. I went to this treatment center and I began the discovery process. I had never been clean my whole adult life. I was 32 years old and I had never been more than a week without medicating how I felt until that point. And I went to this place, and here I didn't have any money. I didn't have anything I offer. All I had was me. And there was a group of people there that told me they loved me. Words I had never heard growing up from my family. We just did, they just, it just wasn't said in my home. And man, they just welcomed me and all my brokenness. And I had never experienced that in my life. I had never experienced that in my life. I looked up and the 12 steps were on the wall, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And then I saw the word God. My skin crawled. I thought, what have I got myself into? I was thinking Hare Krishna and all that stuff. Or is it some kind of religious cult? Or they're going to make me shave my head? I mean, just all kinds of stuff went through my mind. But God stepped in. And that's where I was introduced to that. I was agnostic at this point, and they let me be agnostic. They let me they directed me and told me I could believe in whatever I wanted to. And that was the beginning. That brokenness. I didn't have nothing. I had nothing. I had nothing left. And I had absolutely nothing to give anybody. And that's the essence of being powerless.
Mm.
You know?
So now I'm thinking of principle 2 that says, earnestly believe that God exists,
that I matter to him,
that I matter to him, and that he has the power to help me recover.
Amen.
So now that was like was it called AA or was it Narcotics Anonymous or what was the group called?
Well, it was a treatment facility that I went to in a country town south of Nashville. It was called Buffalo Valley was the name of it. Grant funded place with a huge success rate. There wasn't all the bells and whistles. It was an old country house that had been transformed. The women slept upstairs, the men slept downstairs. There was 21 people, and it was real. It was real. And by the time I was 3 years clean, I had somebody pray with me. At 3 years clean, first person I'd ever had pray with me and touched me. They asked me, and they touched me while they were praying for me. And something changed in my life that night. I remember that very vividly. It was in the parking lot outside after a secular recovery meeting, after an NA meeting. It was in the parking lot, and he asked me if he could pray for me. I was going through something, and I said, sure, why not? So he did. And I started recognizing those things. I started recognizing those God winks, that were things that were happening in my life, godly people that God just kept putting in my path, you know.
So where were you? It sounded to me like you were sober, but someone prayed for you and you said something happened. What's going on inside of you?
Well, I'll be honest, I was very happy because I'd never experienced a life like that before. And I didn't know, like it says in Peter, it says, while we were still ignorant, you know, and I was still ignorant to the fact of what my life could be like with Jesus in my life. Still wasn't looking for it. I just let him pray for me. And look, God was leading me. I was still shaking my fist at God and blaming him for everything that didn't work out. He was my scapegoat at that point. But God was taking that fist and he was gently bringing me closer to him all the time. I didn't know that. I thought it was me. Of course, you know, I'm very self-centered.
When did you get married? What part of the story was the first wife involved?
Right, the first wife, I got married the first time, 1979.
So in the military, out of the military?
Uh, I had just gotten out.
So you just got out of the military, you met someone, got married, and was she an addict as well? Did you guys
She came from an alcoholic family also. We partied.
yeah,
That was a short-lived marriage. The only
yeah.
thing we had in common was we liked to party. I got married again in 1991. And after we got married, we started having problems, and we ended up at a Christian marriage counselor. How that happened, I don't know. And I thought I was going to be married for the rest of my life. I took my vows literally. By this point, um, I was praying to God. You know, by the time we got together, I mean, that transformation from that 3 to 5 year period, or from that period where that guy prayed for me, man, it was a rapid transition. You know, now I wasn't giving God everything at that point, but I was told that you have to pray in Jesus' name in order for God to hear your prayers. Well, I wanted to make sure mine made it through the roof, but that was the only relationship I had with Jesus was in Jesus' name, amen.
So you knew who Jesus was, and you knew that there was a God, and there was something powerful in prayer. And so you were praying, but it doesn't sound to me like you still had a personal relationship with Christ.
I did not have a personal relationship with Christ at all. It was simply going through emotion. I knew who Jesus was. Um, I didn't have a relationship with Jesus.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like you brought all this baggage in, even though you were clean, but there's still all this dysfunction that's going on inside. And maybe you brought in some anger, maybe you brought in some, some things that weren't healthy in the way you communicated or whatever with your wife. And so it sounds to me like you wound up into a counselor's office. And so tell me about that.
We were having some issues, okay? And she had decided that she didn't want to be married anymore. So we were going to work through these issues. I was committed to my vows. And so we attended and went to this counselor and started, she had 2 children. So that was a blended family is always an issue. And I will be honest and say that I brought my father into that parenting situation. I realized that at some point, um, um, and changed, but some damage had already been done. So anyway, this counselor suggested that we find a church home. So we did. We found a church home, and we started attending this church. Loved the pastor, and we got baptized. She and I did. It was my second time to be baptized, uh, and we joined a Sunday school class, a married couples class, and we continued to go. And we were going to counseling, and she didn't want to be married, so I went and talked to the pastor, and I told him what was going on, and this is what he said. He said, "Steve, it takes two to make a marriage. And if she doesn't want to be in it, you can't make her stay. So a couple of weeks later, I went, oh, after she left, I went back and I went to my married couple Sunday school class. So I go in and I share with them. Because remember, I'm in recovery. I share stuff. And so I go in and I'm sharing with them what happened. And I'm not kidding when I say this. It was like Moses parting the Red Sea. I'm sitting in this circle and they literally moved away from me. They moved away from me. And I'm like, I can't believe this. So I share what's going on. And when they moved, I was like, oh no, you didn't just do that. But I left church that day and I didn't return to church for over 10 years.
Mm.
That was the last time I was going to let those church people hurt me. At that point, I was 7 years clean. I didn't return to church again until I was 17 years clean.
So that's interesting that you stayed clean. So you had the church hurt. You said, I'm turning my back on that. So it sounds to me like, was God included in that? Did you just say, you know what, I don't want anything to do with God or church, or did you still pray to God? I mean, tell me
Well, I
where.
was I was still going to meetings. I never quit going to my NA and
Okay,
NA meetings. I
okay,
never quit doing. I didn't want to use.
right,
I just didn't want to go to church no more.
okay,
I didn't want to be around those people.
yeah,
Because I felt like it just reconfirmed my beliefs from a child.
yeah.
I was wounded. I was really, really hurt, Eric. I was hurt like I've never let people hurt me before. And I was hurt and I was angry.
So your wife, I'm assuming, did divorce you,
Yeah.
or okay. So she
She's
left.
been married twice since then.
Okay, so she left. So you're by yourself, but you're clean and you're sober. But so where? So and you said you're going to meetings. So 10 years before you went back to church. So what happened during that 10-year time period? I mean, are you still doing construction work? Are you still? I mean, what's going on in your life?
Yeah, I'm self-employed. I worked for myself most of my life, and um, life just went on. It just
Yeah,
went on. I one day at a time.
yeah.
One moment at a time. But there came a time when the God of my understanding wasn't cutting the mustard anymore. It just wasn't working. This is when my life changed. This is that 17-year mark. I hit a bottom, another bottom. I was clean, but I was miserable. I refer to it, I was spiritually bankrupt. My limited knowledge of Jesus and God just wasn't doing it anymore. I was miserable. And I was sharing about it in a meeting. And this individual came up to me after the meeting and said, my church has a 12-step Bible study that happens every Wednesday night. Would you like to come? And my response, it was like, it caught my ear. 12 step? I knew about the steps. So I looked at him and I said, sure. What have I got to lose? So I went. This is where God starts showing out. I went that Wednesday night. The guy who was leading the group came up to me and he said, well, hey, he introduced himself, really nice. And he said, so what brings you here? Well, he welcomes me and introduces me to everybody. And he said, did we start the meeting? And he prays and he says, so what brings you here? So I gave them the version of my story that hinged on the R rating with this in mind, that if I was going to get rejected, it was going to happen that night, and it wasn't going to happen after I got settled in. I wasn't going to do that again. I had this wall up to here. I mean, and Eric, he looked at me, and when he got through, and he said, "Are you coming back next week, aren't you?" invited me back. Man, I know now what I witnessed at that point was the love of Christ. He loved me anyway. And I came back that next week, and I came back, and I came back, and I came back. And then finally, I wasn't going to church. I had told them what had happened, and they were, empathetic. And he had been wounded in the church. This guy was recovering from sexual addiction, and but he was one of those. But I didn't hear it at that time. He was reminded me that it wasn't God that hurt me; it was just the people in the church. But I wasn't ready for that. And so, anyways, I went back to church, went back to that group, and finally one night I went. The church was growing, and they had Saturday night services. So I was determined I'm not going to go to church on Sunday, just in spite. So I went to a Saturday night, and I sat up in the balcony in the very back corner, and I heard worship like I'd never heard before, music in the church like I'd never heard before. The message from the pastor was straight from God, straight to me. Look, I can't tell you a word he said. And it might as well have just been me and him in the building, me up in the balcony, him on the stage, and he's talking directly to me. And that was in September. I don't remember the date, but that was in September of 2004. And that night, Jesus took my heart, and he hasn't given it back since. And my life has never been the same then. I continued to go to that Wednesday night service. I started going to church on Sunday. Uh, and the same guy that welcomed me that night, he started talking about Celebrate Recovery. And this was in 2004. We started, man, it was like, man, this is awesome. This is just what I need. Look, I started to see that all of this stuff that I had learned in secular recovery was from the Bible. I had no idea, you know? So it was like, man, and I got a life recovery Bible, and it tied it all together for me. We started talking about Celebrate Recovery, and we went to the pastor in January of 2005 and presented what we wanted to do. We started our 90-day kickoff, and in April of 2005, we kicked off our first night of Celebrate Recovery. And just recently, the Celebrate Recovery at Long Hollow celebrated 20 years. God took somebody that lived in the pits of despair and the darkness, that had done so many mean, nasty, ugly things to people, and took me and put me in a position to create a ministry that would change thousands of lives. Man, it just blows me away.
Amen, brother. So let's turn it towards the listeners, Steve. Someone's listening today, and maybe they're in the depth of their addiction or in the depth of their hurt. What would you encourage them to do?
All of these things never would have happened if it wasn't for surrendering, stepping out of my way and letting God guide my path. And I can promise if there's someone out there that is wondering if it would work for them, I would love to sit down with them and tell them. I would love to sit down and tell them my whole story and let them know that if God can use me, he can use you. Romans is one of my favorite books of the Bible. And Romans 8, verses 38 and 39 is one of my favorite two verses in the Bible. And I'm reading from the New Living Translation. It says, "And I'm convinced that nothing can ever separate us from his love. Death can't, and life can't. The angels can't, and the demons can't. Our fears for today, our worries about tomorrow, and even the powers of hell can't keep God's love away. Whether we are high above the sky or in the deepest ocean, nothing in all creation will ever be able to separate us from the love of God that is revealed in Christ Jesus our Lord. That is a hope shot. You've got to want it. And you wouldn't be listening to this if you didn't want it. So you've taken that first step. So give yourself a break. But I would say give it a shot. God will forever change your heart if you just give it the opportunity. You owe yourself that opportunity.
Steve, thanks so much for sharing your life change story with us. Hey, if you are listening today and you have some past hurts that have not healed properly, you may have had some church hurt that has caused you to view God in a negative way. Don't let the hurt of others skew your view of God. Jesus Christ loves you no matter what you have done, and He desires to heal your hurts and give you lasting peace and joy, just like He did for Steve. However, if nothing changes, nothing changes. See you next time.